Danisa ma'am, you can proceed.
Yes, sir. Sir,
Okay ma'am, you can start the program.
thank you, sir.
Okay.
Peace begins in your heart, grows in your mind, manifests through your will, and spreads through your action. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Welcome you one and all for joining 10th session of second phase AICTE sponsored 1 week short-term training program on basic of remote sensing, geographical information system, and global navigation satellite system. This is Danisha, Assistant Professor in the Department of Civil Engineering. On behalf of Francis Xavier Engineering College, an autonomous institution in Tirunelveli, and Department of Civil Engineering, I thank each and everyone for joining today's session. Keep 3 words in the pocket. Try, true, trust. Try for better future. True with your work. Trust in God. Then success will be at your feet. It's my proud privilege to welcome and introduce an eminent personality as our guest speaker. We are delighted to have the sculpture of human character, Dr. Ishwar Rajashekharan, Sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He did his BE in Geoinformatics from College of Engineering, Guindy in the year 2010 and PhD in Civil Engineering from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore in the year 2016. His research focuses on the thermal remote sensing, modeling evapotranspiration from remote sensing application in hydrology and drug monitoring. To his credit, he published a number of research papers in international journals and conferences. In view of recognition of his initiatives, he has bestowed with Raman Endowment Award and Chandrasekharan Memorial Endowment Award from the College of Engineering, Guinea. He is an outstanding contributor in reviewing journals like Remote Sensing of Environment and Journal of Geology. We are certainly grateful and thankful to him for accepting our invitation humbly and gladly to become the guest speaker of this session. We are really thankful to him for taking the time out of his busy schedule to present the session. On behalf of Department of Civil Engineering and on my own behalf, I welcome you, sir. Participants, we are looking
Yeah,
forward on your active participation. I ensure the session will be profitable and fruitful for everyone present here. Welcome you one and all. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time to our guest speaker. Over to you, sir.
uh, thank you, ma'am. Thanks for like a very generous introduction, and yeah, thanks for inviting me to present a part of my research as well as my knowledge with all the participants taking part in this STTP program. So, welcome you all to this particular lecture. So basically the topic is mentioned in the brochure as application of remote sensing for earth resource management. But in the last moment, like I prefer to change it in the area of the core research area of my work, that is thermal infrared remote sensing. So today I'll be talking about thermal infrared remote sensing and applications rather than the topic presented in the brochure. Sorry for this last minute change. I informed the organizers just 1 or 2 days before. This is because I felt that this particular form of remote sensing, thermal remote sensing, is not being getting enough attention, at least in Indian subcontinent. We do a lot of remote sensing in optical domain, microwave domain, and we see a lot of work getting published, but thermal remote sensing is not getting enough attention, but it has a very wide potential in apply for its application in several areas. That's why I thought I can present to the audience about some basics about thermal infrared remote sensing and also quickly highlight some potential areas of application of the same. So I'll start sharing my screen. Yes. So hope every one of you is able to see my screen. If not, kindly let me know.
We can
So,
able to see your screen, sir.
okay, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So as I said, like the topic of today's lecture will be on thermal infrared remote sensing. So this is like the 5th day of this STTP, and I'm sure most of you would have come across the basic principles of remote sensing and its applications in different domains explained to you by the other speakers. So I try to take it forward from that point where assuming certain knowledge you have, and I'll also provide certain background needed to understand this particular topic. Okay, I hope every one of you come across this in several of the remote sensing lectures. First thing is like the electromagnetic spectrum. So here, normally like we can classify this into like several domains that we all know. Several classes of EM spectrum are there. But to quickly tell what will happen, basically if you talk about wavelength less than 3 micrometers, that is in the visible domain, NIR domain, and shortwave infrared domain. The primary source of incoming energy or the primary source that we do in remote sensing is from the sun. Like Earth receive energy from the sun, it gets reflected, we receive it. This should have been taught in the basic lectures, the introductory lectures. In this particular lecture, what are we going to see is remote sensing between the domain of 8 to 14 micrometers. That is in the infrared portion. When we talk about like this 8 to 14 micrometer wavelengths, we are essentially doing what is known as thermal infrared remote sensing. So when we do remote sensing or when we send sensors to space, which can sense in this 8 to 14 micrometer wavelength, essentially the energy sensed by that particular sensor is because of the emission by Earth surface features. That is, sun has no role to play in that particular wavelength. No energy from the sun will be coming in that particular wavelength. So whatever the energy that leaves the Earth will be essentially by Earth's own emission. That is, like in a normal remote sensing in a visible or NIR domain, say less than 3 micrometers, we will have the land surface, sun's energy will come in, will be reflected back, and it will be recorded by the sensor in space. This is a normal reflectance based remote sensing. Like you would have come across spectral reflectance curve, how vegetation looks. Maybe such topics might have been dealt by earlier speakers. What we are going to see today is, what we are going to see today is a land surface due to its own internal energy can emit some radiation on its own. This emitted radiation will be primarily in this 8 to 14, not 8 to 14, but I am limiting this particular lecture to this wavelength. I will show you, I'll explain in detail how the Earth's emission will look. So whatever the Earth is emitting, primarily in this particular wavelength of 8 to 14 micrometers, if we send some sensors to space and collect that radiation, whatever we will measure essentially will tell us about the energy content of the Earth's surface. Like what is the energy content of Earth's surface, how much of energy is used for different purposes, how the land is, how hot or how cold the land is, all this kind of properties related to the thermal nature of the Earth's surface or the temperature of the Earth's surface, we will be able to sense. So whatever we are going to discuss in today's lecture will essentially be dealing about remote sensing in the bandwidth of 8 to 14 micrometers, and we call this particular remote sensing as thermal infrared remote sensing. The reason for this particular name will be there in the following slides. Before going in detail into the concepts of thermal remote sensing, I would just like to quickly recall some of the energy transfer mechanisms that we have learned during our school days maybe. We know that whenever heat energy has to transfer from one place to other place, not only heat, whatever form of energy, it can transmit itself in 3 ways: conduction, convection, and radiation. We know that. Just as a quick recall, I will briefly touch upon what mode is what kind of thing. Okay, so in conduction, basically heat energy will be transferred from one point to other point via physical contact of molecules. Say inside solids and all, molecules will be tightly connected with each other without any sort of movement, and heat energy will be transferred from one molecule to the next molecule via conduction. So if we keep like a hot pan on top of the stove, and if we touch the handle of the pot, we will feel the heat because the heat transfers from the stove to the pot vessel and it is slowly transferred to the handle. This process is conduction. There is no physical motion of the molecule of the metal. Metal remains intact. Nothing moves inside the metal, but heat is transferred by mere physical contact from one molecule to the other molecule. This process is convection. Convection is, let us say now the pot is filled with water, cold water, and you are heating it. When you heat that pot of water, what will happen? After a certain period of time, the molecules in the water will begin to undergo random motion. And because of this motion of molecules, like the molecules that are near the bottom of the vessel will get the heat, will become lighter in density, will move up. Colder molecules will come down. They will get heated up, they will move up, and other set of molecules will come down. So this sort of eddy chain or eddy loop will be set up, where cold molecules will come down and hot molecules will go up. This is known as convection. Essentially, this is what happens during like broad sunny daytime. If we go across like any hot open areas, we feel the heat on our face, right? So this is convection process. Heat is actually being transferred from ground to the atmosphere via the process of convection. Air takes away the heat and moves upward. And radiation, the third form of heat transfer. Radiation is a form of heat transfer which doesn't need any medium to occur. That is like if the stove is burning and if you go near the stove, we feel some warm, right? Normally during like cold days, especially on hilly areas, people used to lit fire and sit around it, and the heat energy from the fire will reach the person sitting around it in form of radiation. We cannot basically see it. Our eyes are not trained to see that particular radiation, but we can feel it. Some form of energy is coming from the hot fire and falling on us. So this particular concept, why I am telling is the major principle of energy transfer that occurs on the Earth's surface will take any one of these three forms. This is like, and there are like different processes on the Earth's surface which will take any one of the form, and you based on the form of energy transfer, the energy recorded by our sensor or various processes on the Earth will be defined basically. So if we take, yes please.
No, we cannot view the PPT. It's still stuck in the first slide only.
Still stuck in the first slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, one second. Is it visible now, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Now I'm moving the screen. Is it visible, the movement?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Yeah, so what I basically talked about is the three ways of energy transfer: conduction, convection, and radiation. So if you take a simple example of Earth's surface, so sun radiation will be coming in and it will be heating up the Earth's surface. Earth has its own internal energy. So all these things, all the like solar radiation, Earth's own internal energy, everything will start heating up the Earth's surface. Earth's temperature will change, and due to which Earth also will emit some form of radiation, because Earth has its own temperature, some own heat energy on its own. It will begin to transfer the heat energy from the land to the atmosphere. This energy transfer will always be happening. It won't stop. So if we can collect this form of radiation via some sensors and use to calculate the temperature of the Earth's surface, we call that particular way of remote sensing as thermal infrared remote sensing. So using the radiation emitted by Earth, if we calculate the temperature of Earth's surface, we call that particular remote sensing as thermal infrared remote sensing. So what we are measuring essentially in the satellite remote sensing is radiation part, heat transfer via radiation form. And as I told, there are other processes on the Earth's surface which takes these two forms, conduction or convection, which basically defines all the three of these processes, basically define the energy content of the Earth's surface, all the three taken together. If any one changes, if any one heat transfer mechanism changes, the other one also will change. Effectively, it will produce like a chain effect. So all the three ways of energy transfer occurs on the Earth's surface, but we will not be measuring heat transfer through conduction or convection. We will be measuring the heat transfer only through radiation wave using remote sensing techniques and use it for various applications. And also, like, I would like to quickly tell you some terms which, if you can remember, it will be helpful for the coming slides or even for your own remote sensing subject knowledge. Okay, so maybe I'll quickly go to that concepts first, or maybe before going to that concepts, I will explain this solid angle and plane angle difference. This is just to tell you how remote sensing observations are basically made. That's all. Nothing much is there. So we know like the concept of what is known as a plane angle, like we would have done a lot of geometry exercises in our school days, early college days, and so on. So plane angle is essentially nothing but the angular difference between any two lines having like a common intersection point. So if you have like any two lines here, and if you want to define an angle with this, what essentially we have to do? So what we have to do is we have to draw an arc between those two lines, measure the arc length L, and whatever the length of the line, let us say it is R. So the angle theta is nothing but the ratio of L by R. This we all know. The unit is radians. Commonly we use degrees, but the scientific unit what we have to use is radians. So one circle has 2 pi radians of angle. So very simple definition of plane angle. The same extension of this concept to a three-dimensional space is known as what's known as a solid angle. That is, let us say you have a remote sensing sensor in space. So it will be like a small element. Let us say this is the small sensor that is collecting the energy from the Earth's surface. When this particular sensor see the Earth's surface, it will actually be seeing in form of like a cone. You can imagine it in three-dimensional space. Like if you project a point on the space, like if you have a point on the space and if you project that particular point on the ground, you will essentially have a circle here as the base. And if you can join them with a line, you will finally get a cone. This is Earth's surface. This is like the sensor in space. And this particular angle, the three-dimensional angle, is what we call the solid angle. So essentially why I am telling this is most of the remote sensing measurements or most of the remote sensing sensors that we do subtends a conical shape on the Earth's surface. Like whatever the energy is coming in within this particular area will be traveling through this particular cone or this particular solid angle, and it will reach the sensor. So solid angle, it can be denoted by different symbols. I use the symbol of omega, defined as the ratio of whatever is the surface area, S. Like let the area of this particular ground area be S, some meter square, divided by this particular length, or length square should be. So area by length square. It's like a simple three-dimensional extension of a 2D angle. So the reason for me to tell is almost all remote sensing observations observe the Earth from a three-dimensional point of view. So most of the sensors will look the Earth by subtending in form of like a small cone. Like a very good analogy is like if you are traveling on an aeroplane and if you look out through a window, what your eyes see actually will be in form of like a cone. Like you are sitting in an aeroplane here, this is the window, you are sitting inside, and if you see through the window, what will happen is your eyes will see like a small cone on the ground, and whatever feature is present within that particular conical solid angle only will reach your eyes. If any object is present here, your eyes will not be able to see it because it is out of your vision range. Similarly, if any object is present here, again your eyes will not be able to see it. Your vision is limited and your vision has a definite three-dimensional solid angle. Same concept with the remote sensing sensor also. Each remote sensing sensor has its own conical projection on the ground, most of the cases, and which will determine the area over which the energy is collected. It is not really necessary to know this at this stage, but you know, like when you go deeper into remote sensing field, any variation in the solid angle is going to cause a lot of your trouble. Like you will understand it when you do your research in remote sensing, but at this stage, I leave this point. If someone is really interested, we can discuss it at a later stage. Okay, I told you like it is good to understand certain quantities, certain definitions. Again, I'm not going to dig deeper into it. Just two concepts I will say. One is, see, whenever some form of energy is coming in from the earth towards the earth's surface, let us assume this is earth's surface. When some form of energy is coming in towards the earth's surface, any point on the earth can receive energy from any point on the hemisphere surrounding it. That is, let us say this is like a small land area, and let us assume everywhere it is completely open, an open parcel of land. Then it will be possible for us to build a small hemisphere surrounding this particular object of interest. That is, just putting like a lid over the particular field. So essentially what we are doing is that particular land surface can receive energy in any given direction in a within that particular hemisphere. Similarly, a land surface can also emit energy in any different direction. That is, the energy received or the energy emitted by land surface is actually exist in all possible directions. This is what is really happening. Whatever energy is being emitted by Earth's surface, it is occurring in all directions. If you want to collect it, essentially you need to put a lid around that particular object of interest, a hemispherical lid, and collect all the energy that is being emitted by an object. So this is how ideally we should collect energy. If you want to measure energy for remote sensing purposes, if you want to really quantify how much the object reflects, what is the reflectance of object, or how much an object emit, technically we should measure all the energy surrounding the object in the entire hemisphere surrounding it, like put a full lid around the object, measure whatever energy coming out of the object within that particular hemispherical lid. On the other hand, what actually happens in remote sensing is we won't be able to collect all the energy surrounding the object. Like we will not be able to measure everything, all sort of energy. Our sensor in space, whatever be the sensor, be it in visible domain, be it in thermal domain, whatever, essentially measures the energy from an object in only one direction. Okay, so we are not measuring the total energy that is either coming in towards an object or going out from an object. Via remote sensing, all our measurements has what is known as a directionality. Essentially, we are measuring something only from one particular direction. Why is this important? Because by virtue of nature of Earth's surface features, the energy emitted or reflected by such objects will be different for different directions of observations. Let us say it's a cropland. Okay, some crop is standing. If I have a sensor here and look at the crop and like let it certain like a small conical solid angle, whatever the energy coming in from this particular crop will be different. Let us say the quantity we measured is number 1. Some random example I'm telling. Okay. Now the sensor is moved to this particular point and it is seeing like the same cropland but from a different direction or a different viewing angle. The energy received by the sensor now will not be same as 1, it will be some other value, say 2 units. This is because almost all objects on the Earth's surface has a directional nature of sending out energy. I said like objects emit energy on their own, and the emission of energy will vary with respect to directions. So as the remote sensing sensors move to different point in space, it is going to see the same object in a completely different way. What information we are going to collect? is going to differ a lot. So this sort of directional energy measurement in remote sensing parlance, we call it as radiance. Okay. So I'm not actually defining what is radiance. I'm just telling you the underlying concept of it, why it is needed for us. So essentially, whatever measurements we do has a lot of directionality into it. A same object may look completely different if your sensor position changes. So the energy measured by a sensor has directional property. We call that particular energy measurement as radiance. Okay, so what satellite measures is known as radiance. So I'm not going again in detail. I just wanted you to know, like, whatever remote sensing measurement occurs, it occurs within like a small solid angle, like a conical shape is subtended on Earth. Whatever energy is coming within that conical area is collected by the sensor, and that energy collection will vary with respect to direction. Okay, now we will go into the concepts of thermal infrared remote sensing. And by the way, just one thing I would like to say, if any one of you have any doubts or any questions during my talk, please feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions. I'll be happy to answer you. You need not wait till the end of the lecture. Okay, we'll continue now. I told you, like, all objects emit radiation. All points on the Earth's surface emit radiation. That is true. But is there some basic equations to define it? Yes, it is there. There are three important laws, physical laws, which helps us to quantify the amount of energy emitted by Earth's surface. Not only Earth's surface, almost all features in this universe, if they are above a temperature of 0 Kelvin, that is minus 273.15 degrees Celsius, if the temperature of an object is more than this particular temperature, that object will emit some energy on its own. It will be occurring continuously. It will not, it's a non-stop process. And by this time, I guess you would have been introduced to the concept of energy coming in from the sun, like the solar spectrum and all. So basically what I want to say is, based on the temperature of an object, the energy emitted will vary. Say, like, we'll take the best example, sun. The average temperature of the sun, we can assume it to be 6000 Kelvin. At that 6000 Kelvin, sun will emit certain amount of energy. The Earth's average temperature can be assumed to be around 300 Kelvin. So Earth will emit some energy based on its own temperature. Say our own bodies, maybe we will be at roughly about 36 degrees Celsius roughly, and which will relate to slight around like 315 Kelvin or 312 Kelvin, let us say. We will also be emitting some energy radiation. Actually, this is what people are using for measuring our body temperature in airports, that non-contact thermometer, which people will point in our forehead to measure temperature now for thermal screening in airports or railway stations, is basically an example for thermal remote sensing. They are measuring the radiation from our body, calculating temperature out of its particular thing. Okay, so these three laws will tell us how much energy is being emitted by an object if the object is at a given temperature. The three laws are Planck's law, Stefan-Boltzmann law, and Wien's displacement law. I'll tell you these laws with particular example. Okay, so this is like an object is at one particular temperature, let us say 2000 Kelvin, and that particular object will emit radiation because of its own internal temperature. And when energy is distributed, that energy can be distributed in several wavelengths, basically, because we know that electromagnetic energy or electromagnetic radiation is not one wavelength, it's like a huge spectrum. Energy can take any wavelength in the spectrum, that is up to the object which is emitting, that we know. So if an object is at 2000 Kelvin, it will essentially have a curve like this, an energy emission curve like this. Okay, so where x-axis is the wavelength and y-axis is the amount of energy emitted. So if an object is at 2000 Kelvin, at a given wavelength, say 1 micrometer, this will be the energy emitted by an object. Similarly, at 2 micrometers, the energy emitted by an object will be like this, and so on. So this is given by the Planck's law. Planck's law will tell us if an object is at a given temperature, at a given wavelength, what will be the energy emitted by the object. Okay, so this is like highly fundamental law which we use a lot in almost all sort of remote sensing purposes. Planck's law. But if you want the total amount, say for example in Planck's law we will get just every 1 point in this particular curve. What is the total amount of energy emitted by an object? Like if I want to calculate the total amount of energy emitted by this object at 900 Kelvin, I should essentially find the area under the curve, right? Because we learned in calculus, integral differential calculus, if there is like a function y is equal to f of x, if you want to integrate y, then essentially you are trying to find out the area under the curve. So integration is essentially area under the curve. So what am I going to do is, I am going to find the total energy emitted by this object at 900 Kelvin. So I am just going to find the area under this particular big curve. If I do this, I'll be able to calculate the total energy emitted by the object. And that is given by Stefan-Boltzmann law. So these two laws are highly important laws. I will anyway, I'm not going to explain each and every term in the equations, but just the basic output of the equations. That is, Planck's law will tell us if an object is at T, temperature T, at a given wavelength lambda, what will be its energy emission? Whereas Stefan-Boltzmann law says, if an object is at a given temperature T, what will be the total energy emitted by the object? So Stefan-Boltzmann law is essentially the integral of the Planck's law. We are integrating the Planck's law with the entire electromagnetic spectrum, 0 to infinity wavelengths. I again go back to the curve, like this curve maybe I'll explain. So this is like how different objects will look, or different objects will emit energy basically. So this particular yellow curve typically represent the emission from sun, and this particular red curve typically represent the emission from Earth's surface. If you look these two, sun is at a much higher temperature, Earth is at a much lower temperature, average temperature I'm talking about. So the energy emitted by sun is much higher, energy emitted by Earth is much lower, and also there will be like some point where there is a peak emission of energy. That is, the amount of energy emitted at a certain wavelength will be the maximum. So that peak wavelength where there is maximum emission occurs is given by Wien's displacement law. Okay. So the energy emitted, the peak energy emission from any one point will vary with respect to the object temperature. Say with respect to sun, the peak energy emission will occur around 0.55 micrometers. Since peak energy happens in visible wavelength, due to evolution, our eyes are tuned to seeing the visible light. That is, the sun radiation that is coming in from the sun has most of its energy content in between this 0.4 to 0.7 micrometers, with a peak emission around 0.55 micrometers. That is why our eyes have adapted itself for seeing this particular light. We cannot see any other wavelengths. On the other hand, the peak emission for Earth will happen something around like 9 micrometers, rough value of 9 micrometers, which we cannot see. But at 9 micrometers, the energy emitted by sun will be, this energy emitted by Earth will be maximum. So if you send any particular sensor to observe this, we will essentially be sensing the energy emitted by Earth's surface. So the three laws, what I told you is, or just I introduced is Planck's law, Stefan-Boltzmann law, and Wien's displacement law. So Planck's law essentially tells you the energy emitted by any object at a given temperature T at a given wavelength lambda. Stefan-Boltzmann law will tell us the energy emitted by an object at a given temperature T, and Wien's displacement law will tell us the wavelength at which peak energy emission occurs. That's it. These three basic laws. Okay, now I told you all these things. So now we will actually come to the process of defining what thermal infrared remote sensing is. So just by looking at the laws, we could have inferred that any object with temperature above absolute zero will radiate energy or will emit energy in form of radiation. And if you observe this radiated energy and calculate that object's temperature, that is known as TIR remote sensing. And for Earth, the emission occurs, the peak emission occurs something around like 9 micrometers. And whatever remote sensing you do in the range of around 9 micrometer, basically we take 8 to 14 micrometers because Earth can emit in this particular range. We call remote sensing of that as thermal remote sensing, because essentially whatever we measure is related to temperature of Earth or the energy content of Earth. Okay, but satellites, we know that there is some atmospheric absorption and scattering that occurs, and there is some portion of the spectrum where atmosphere is transparent, what we call it as atmospheric windows. I hope these concepts have been dealt in the earlier classes or earlier lectures. Atmospheric windows. So essentially there are like only few windows in this particular EMR spectrum. So we normally do remote sensing in 10.5 to 10.5 to 12.5 micrometers. This is we cannot use because of ozone absorption, but sensors normally use this particular band to observe the energy from Earth and calculate the temperature of Earth's surface. And the temperature we calculate using this particular remote sensing process is known as land surface temperature. Okay, so in short we call it as LST, or the temperature measured using remote sensing techniques. Okay, so our aim in thermal infrared remote sensing is calculate this particular temperature. So the output will not be reflectance. Like if you do remote sensing in visible, NAR or SWR domains, we will get reflectance. I know, I guess you should be knowing what reflectance is by now, but in thermal remote sensing, we will be calculating what is known as land surface temperature, LST. So it's actually the temperature of the Earth's surface. Excuse me for a second. Okay, let's continue. Yeah. Now we are moving to like a very important concept of what is known as emissivity. I go back to these laws. Yeah, the Planck's law. So what Planck's law will tell us, I told you that Planck's law will tell us if an object is at a given temperature T at a given wavelength, what will be the energy emitted by that object. But this is like an upper limit. Upper limit in the sense that is the maximum amount of energy that can come out of an object at a given temperature at a given wavelength. So it's the upper limit. So no object can exceed that curve basically, but objects can emit energy less than what is prescribed by this curve. Let us say this should be the curve for an object at 300 Kelvin. Let us say some random curve I am drawing. This as prescribed by Planck's law. In reality, objects on the Earth's surface may not follow Planck's law, may not emit radiation like this, but it can emit radiation like this. Less than what is prescribed by Planck's law. Actually, this is what will happen for almost all objects on the Earth's surface. This is because the objects on the Earth's surface are not capable enough to transform heat energy into radiant energy as prescribed by Planck's law or as defined by concepts of thermodynamics. Basically, here we are talking about heat energy. So the object should obey thermodynamic laws. Okay. So what I want to say is object has certain amount of heat energy. Based on its heat energy, it will emit radiation, but that emission or emitted radiation will not go up to the level as prescribed by Planck's law. It will be less than what is prescribed by Planck's law. It will be like this, a small difference will be there. It will not match with the Planck's law. This is because naturally occurring objects do not have the capacity to transfer all the heat energy into radiant energy. There is some lag. Almost all objects on the Earth's surface have this tendency. They cannot emit radiation as prescribed by Planck's law. They will have something less than actually what is being prescribed by Planck's law. So is there any object which can emit or which can follow Planck's law? There are few objects like what people build in the laboratory experiments known as black bodies. Like this is not like a really existing natural object. People develop this in laboratory for their own purposes and assume it to be equal to black body. So certain objects, hypothetical objects I will say, only they can perfectly follow Planck's law. All other natural objects cannot follow Planck's law, will emit radiation less than what is prescribed by Planck's law, and that particular ratio is what we call as emissivity. So emissivity has a symbol of epsilon, is given by energy actually emitted by an object at temperature T to the energy that should be emitted as prescribed by Planck's law. Okay, so this is the ratio. What is the actual amount of energy that came in from an object at a temperature T and at a given wavelength lambda? We should measure it, and if we divide it by the calculation from Planck's law, whatever calculation we do in Planck's law, if we divide this by that, we get what is known as emissivity. So emissivity will vary from 0 to 1, and almost all features on the Earth's surface has emissivity less than 1. So the very good emitter on the Earth's surface is water body. Its emissivity is 0.99, so very close to a blank body. It will follow Planck's law to 99%. A very high green healthy vegetation with full of water content, it can have an emissivity of around like 0.985 or 0.99. It's a very good emitter. But if you take like highly polished metal surfaces, like you go to there are like now a lot of buildings being built with like steel surfaces, steel rods and all. If they are like highly polished metal surfaces, their emissivity will be in the order of say 0.7, 0.8 and so on. That is, they cannot emit energy, or they can emit energy only up to say 70% of what is prescribed by Planck's law, or 80% of what is prescribed by Planck's law, and so on. This is the real nature of objects on the Earth's surface. So why we should need this emissivity? What is its implication? Maybe like I'll explain it in the coming slides. If I tell it, it may be sort point of confusion. Okay. So now we got introduced to the term emissivity. Based on emissivity, objects can be classified as black body, gray body, or selective radiators. So what exactly black body is? Black body is the ones which can obey Planck's law. I told that these are hypothetical objects. Truly speaking, no object on the Earth's surface is a pure black body. Everything, whatever people build in lab, are a close relative or like a close representation of black body. They are not true black bodies. So black body is one which should actually obey Planck's law, and hence emissivity is 1. Gray bodies they don't obey Planck's law. Whatever the radiation emitted by them will be less than prescribed by Planck's law, but it will be like a constant ratio. The ratio emissivity will be a constant across the wavelength. Say if this is the curve prescribed by Planck's law, the curve followed by the actual object may be like this. Say 80% of Planck's law. Say this is the actual object. This is prescribed by Planck's law. So emissivity is equal to, let us say it is 80% of energy, 0.8, which is a constant across all wavelengths. These objects are called gray bodies. Most of the objects on the Earth's surface are still complicated. They are not as simple as that. First thing, they don't follow Planck's law. In addition to this, the emissivity will also vary with wavelength. That is, if this is like prescribed by Planck's law, the object will actually emit something like this. Which means at each and every wavelength lambda, the ratio of this number to this number, or the energy emitted by an object to the Planck's law, will vary. So the emissivity actually varies with wavelength. And almost all objects on the Earth's surface are selective radiators. They are like highly complex in nature, and hence their emissivity will change with respect to wavelength. Yeah, this is what I told you. This is like the actual Planck's law curve. This is for a gray body where emissivity is a constant. And this is for a selective radiator where emissivity will vary with wavelength. Okay, so here it's emissivity. For a black body, emissivity is equal to 1, it's a constant. For a gray body, emissivity is less than 1, but it's a constant. For a selective radiator, emissivity varies with wavelength. So this is emissivity in y-axis. We have lambda in x-axis. Similarly, here we have the energy emitted in the y-axis, lambda in the x-axis. So almost all objects on the Earth's surface are selective radiators in a real sense. This is like another example of emissivity curve. Fine. So maybe like now I will quickly tell the importance of knowing this emissivity before we proceed further. Why the emissivity is important? Because for us, we have to use Planck's law. That is, let us say I have a satellite sensor in space that will measure the energy incoming from the object of interest. Say it has measured some quantity, say 10 units of energy, let us assume some units. If I want to calculate the temperature of an object, what I should do? I should go back to Planck's law and substitute. Okay, so Planck's law equation will be something like this. The energy emitted will be is equal to this is like the equation for Planck's law. Okay, so the energy emitted, or the radiance, I'll say, I'll little bit use technical term. The radiance emitted will be something like this. So I have the radiance measured by the remote sensing sensor. I know the wavelength in which my sensor is operating. Let us say my sensor is operating in around 10.5 micrometers. Let us assume. At this wavelength, my sensor is operating. This energy I have measured. So I can use this equation, invert it to calculate T, the temperature of the surface. It's as simple as that. It will appear. But imagine this law is actually not obeyed by Earth surface features. Earth surface features will actually emit energy less than what is prescribed by Planck's law. So let us say if Planck's law suggests, if an object is at say if Planck's law suggests the object should emit 12 units of energy, and if the object has a emissivity of say 0.9, it will actually emit 0.9 into 12 units of energy. So this will be less than what is actually prescribed by Planck's law. So if we don't know the emissivity, what are we going to do is we are going to underestimate the temperature of the object. If we don't know the emissivity, we cannot calculate the temperature of Earth surface features using Planck's law. That is the only law we have in hand for these sort of calculations. Without knowing emissivity, that law we cannot use. Whatever temperature we calculate from the law will be underestimated than the true temperature. That is the importance of emissivity. Without knowing emissivity, There is no way we can calculate the surface temperature of objects. Maybe I'll skip this part. Yeah, this is the part I told you in the beginning. Like I told you, like sun's energy is almost zero in this particular wavelength, 8 to 14 micrometers, where we do thermal remote sensing. Like this curve is the sun solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface. You can see here it is almost zero. So whatever energy our remote sensing sensor senses is essentially emitted by Earth's surface. Okay. Now I told you like a very broad overview of what we do in remote sensing, thermal remote sensing. We measure radiance coming out of an object. We estimate somehow the emissivity of object. We combine both of them, substitute them in Planck's law. We can calculate the temperature. It may look as simple. In real life, this is not as simple as it looks, because all the Earth's surface features are actually covered by an atmosphere. So we all know that atmosphere plays a major role in remote sensing. Atmosphere absorbs, atmosphere scatters, all these things we would have learned. Similar effects occur in thermal remote sensing also. That is, say any given land point at a temperature T with an emissivity of epsilon. It will emit some radiation. So if our sensor measures this directly, we can calculate the temperature of this point and use it for various applications. Fine. But because of the presence of atmosphere, what happens is atmosphere also has its own temperature T, has its own emissivity epsilon, that will also emit energy towards the sensor, and that will also emit energy towards the Earth's surface. Everything happens. So the atmosphere adds some unwanted energy content. Adds some unwanted energy content to the energy emitted by Earth's surface. And this complicates matter, because now what the sensor senses is not only the direct emission component from Earth's surface, only this we should measure, but these two terms, they actually add up because of the presence of atmosphere. So whatever we are measuring from our remote sensing sensor essentially contains not only signal from the Earth's surface, but also signal from the atmosphere. And if we use this to calculate, then again we will end up with a wrong temperature for Earth's surface. So this is like very similar to atmospheric absorption or transmittance, which most of us would have come across in the introductory lectures of remote sensing. How atmosphere is clearest at different wavelengths. You can see like in the normal range in which we do thermal remote sensing, this 10 to 12.5 micrometers, the atmospheric transmissivity is like actually like 60 to 70%. It's quite low only, but still we have to do remote sensing. So atmosphere does lot of unwanted emission, it does lot of absorption, everything happens in thermal remote sensing also. So the calculation of surface temperature is not as simple as we think. We cannot just use Planck's law, we have to do a lot of corrections for it. So this is like the actual energy. Yeah, this is like the actual energy that will be reaching the sensor. Again, like I will not explain all the terms, but just what I want you to know is this is the part which we need. This is coming from the land surface. So here we have to know, our aim is measure this energy quantity using Planck's law, calculate this T. In order for us to do, we should know the emissivity of the land surface. We should also know the atmosphere, how clear the atmosphere is, called the atmospheric transmissivity. Okay, so this is because atmosphere does lot of absorption, and hence we use this term. Anyway, this part alone we need. This part, the second and third part, is actually because of atmospheric emission, which We don't need actually, because it is kind of like a noise. It adds some unwanted component to the energy measured by remote sensing sensor. So which will cause lot of disturbance to us when we do our calculations. Okay. Okay, so now I think I described you the basic way in which remote sensing measurements occur, what we measure, and what do we need to calculate, and what are the complications. Like whatever the energy we measure, we need to correct for the effect of atmosphere as well as emissivity. All these basic concepts I have told you in brief. But now at this stage, I would like to introduce certain definition of temperature, because till now I was using the term temperature. But this temperature has certain meaning or certain definition. What is that? One is thermodynamic temperature, T. This is we can also call it as the true temperature of an object. This is the temperature we will measure when we put a thermometer in contact with our object of interest. Let us say like we have fever, we go to a doctor, they will take a thermometer, put it underneath our tongue. They will ask us to open our mouth, put it under our tongue, wait for a few seconds, take the thermometer out and say, okay, you are running a fever. So there they are measuring that thermodynamic temperature, like, or the true temperature of our body, because the thermometer is in physical contact with us. They are allowing some time, like the thermometer and our body should come in thermal equilibrium. They should come to same temperature. Then they will take the thermometer out, measure the temperature. This is known as true temperature or thermodynamic temperature. But nowadays, how doctors or health workers measure our temperature? They point some thermal gun towards our forehead. They absorb the radiation emitted by our body and they calculate temperature from it. So essentially, they are not measuring our true temperature, but they are measuring what is known as a radiometric temperature. So radiometric temperature is essentially what is the temperature you calculate from remote sensing observations. That is, say I said object is here, some land surface is emitting energy. If you put a thermometer on ground and measure the temperature of the land surface, you will get its true temperature. But instead of doing this, you are putting a satellite in space, measure the outgoing energy, calculate temperature from it. That kind of temperature measurement, indirect measurement, we call it as radiometric temperature or land surface temperature. And they will not be the same for most of the cases. The temperature measured by satellite, that is the land surface temperature or the radiometric temperature, will not be the same as the true temperature. If you go to ground, put a thermometer on land surface and you measure it, the temperature measured by your satellite and your ground-based observation will actually differ. They will not be the same. They will be equal only for surfaces which are homogeneous and isothermal, like which is extremely difficult to achieve in real life. Okay, so just the take-home message from this slide is there are differences between the temperature you measure from ground by putting a thermometer in contact and the temperature you measure from a satellite. They are not one and the same. They are different. This one thing you should always remember. There are certain limitations because of the difference, but we may not go deeper into these concepts. So in real world, actually, the remote sensing that we are going to do is still complex. Like let us say this is the satellite sensor, this is the land surface. There may be like a tree standing, there may be like a small house, there may be like a small pond or something. So this particular satellite will actually be seeing like a large angle. It will collect the energy emitted by all these objects. So essentially the measurement we are making with remote sensing is actually an ensemble of all these energy emitted by these different objects, this tree, this house, this pond, everything combined together. So we are not going to calculate the temperature of each and every object. Mostly in remote sensing, we will calculate the temperature of a mixture of objects. 2-3 objects will mix together in one single pixel, and that average temperature is what we are going to measure in remote sensing. Fine. Maybe like at this stage it may be like a little bit confusing. I will tell like few examples for this, or one simple example for this. What happens? Okay. So let us say there is like one parcel of land. It has two objects, object A, object B. These two are black bodies. Just for making our life simple, let us assume these two are black bodies. That is, emissivity is equal to 1 for both the objects. We need not worry about the emissivity. We will leave it. Object A has a temperature of 293 Kelvin. Object B has a temperature of 323 Kelvin. And both of them occupies half of the area of the particular land. Okay. So this is 0.5 of area. This is 0.5 of area. So if I ask someone to go to the field, measure the average temperature of this entire land parcel, what they will do, they will take a thermometer in hand, go to the ground, measure many different points here, and take an average. Basically, that's what we do. We take a thermometer, measure a lot of samples, take an average. That average will be around 308 Kelvin. Okay. If you do a physical measurement. If you do remote sensing, like instead of measuring this physically, I send a remote sensing sensor to space. Now that is measuring, or that is observing the energy emitted by this particular land parcel and trying to calculate a temperature on its own. The temperature what we will get is 309 Kelvin. So here, if you make actual ground measurement, that will be 308 Kelvin. What you get from remote sensing will be 309 Kelvin. You can think the difference is very small, just 1 Kelvin. So what is going to be the major error in this? In this example, we simplified a lot of concepts. Like we said, the entire land has only two parts, which is two different objects at two different temperatures. Both of them are black bodies and so on. There are a lot of simplifying assumptions. Let us look at in case of real world. In real world, let us say this is one full pixel in a remote sensing image. As I said before, there may be like a small house here. There may be like an agricultural field here with a standing crop. There may be like a small farm pond containing full of water, everything. So a single remote sensing pixel will normally not have one object. It will have many objects, each having different temperature. The house may be little cooler or the little hotter. The crop may be little cooler. The pond may be still cooler and so on. So the temperature, let us say this is at 30 degrees Celsius. This may be at 25 degrees Celsius. This may be at 20 degrees Celsius. Each object will be at different true temperatures. Each one of them has different emissivities. So essentially, the measurements we make from remote sensing is kind of like a highly averaged value of the entire land surface. We will not be able to get the true temperature of each and every object on the Earth's surface because of lot of limitations with our remote sensing systems. Okay. Excuse me for a minute. Okay. So, as I said before, the retrieval of land surface temperature from a thermal remote sensing sensor is not an easy problem. It's what is called an ill-posed problem. Ill-posed problem means, let us say we have four unknowns, A, B, C, D. But we have only 3 equations relating this 4 unknowns, means we cannot solve all these 4 unknowns, right? Basic mathematics. We need to assume any one value to any one of the variable. then only we can calculate the other 3. Same thing will happen in calculation of land surface temperature. Finally, we will get certain equations, we have to solve it, but that equations will be ill-posed problem, will not have, the number of unknowns will be more than the number of equations. So some assumptions we have to do, or some more extra calculations we have to do, especially in terms of the emissivity that we calculate. Okay, so just in a nutshell, for calculating the land surface temperature, we must have, or we must correct the measurements made by the thermal remote sensing sensor for atmospheric effects, for surface emissivity. So atmospheric effect, I told you, atmosphere absorbs, atmosphere emits energy on its own, lot of different things happens. Similarly, I told you, almost all land surface features are actually not pure black bodies. Their emissivity will vary with wavelength, and hence their energy radiated also will vary with wavelength, and so on. It's a complex thing that we are actually doing. So this is like a simple way of atmospheric correction, what we do. There are different ways of doing it, but just as a schematic, I will tell. So in atmospheric correction, what we will do, atmosphere, the major elements that influences our remote sensing measurements are water vapor, CO2, ozone, and certain materials, and maybe some sort of aerosol particles, and so on. Whatever being present in the atmosphere, they will influence the remote sensing measurements. So normally we have to do what is known as a radiative transfer modeling. So what radiative transfer modeling is, let us say there is a land surface that is emitting energy on its own. Our sensor is measuring this. While this energy emitted by land surface goes toward the sensor, this radiation will be modified by all these atmospheric terms, or atmospheric contents of the atmosphere, I'll say, due to which the radiation measured by the sensor will be totally different. So what we have to do is, technically speaking, we have to measure all these variables. What is the temperature of air? What is the water vapor content? All the measurements we have to make. And there are certain physical equations which relate. If this is like CO2 content, this will be the absorption, or this will be the energy that is emitted by atmosphere. All the relations are there, and such computer models are called radiative transfer models. Okay, so feed the atmospheric data into the radiative transfer models. RTM means radiative transfer models. Feed the data into it and we can use it. That's the ideal way of doing remote sensing measurements, not only thermal remote sensing. Normally all kind of remote sensing we should technically do like this. But from a practical point of view, this is not possible. All of us will not have measurements of atmospheric data. All of us will not have access to radiative transfer models, and so on. So there should be some simpler way of doing this. And one such simpler way of doing this is, especially for Landsat satellites, I think there was a separate lecture in this course about data product available from Landsat satellite, basics of Landsat based remote sensing. So if you look at like Landsat data, Landsat 5, Landsat 7, Landsat 8, all has a thermal band, thermal IR band. So in order to correct for atmospheric effects of such band, NASA has created a tool actually. So this is the website address. You can go and log in. So what it will do is, let us say you are going to acquire an image over an area. Let us say some point over Tirunelveli, over the place where the college is located. So, and let us say you are going to acquire an image on 1st January 2020. So Landsat will have overpass around like 10:30 AM roughly. So if you feed all this information, okay, the latitude and longitude of Tirunelveli, the date and time of your acquisition, if you pass all this information to this particular website, it will tell you the effect of atmosphere over that particular zone at that particular time. So this is, they are using some sort of atmospheric models, and they are running a radiative transfer model known as MODTRAN, and from that you can calculate. So for Landsat, this is very simple. You have to just feed the information into this website and you can get the output. And this output is more or less highly reliable. You can use this for your various project work or research work, especially with Landsat series of satellites. This will give you the all the information that is needed. For other sensors, other than Landsat, people thought, okay, if you put only one thermal band, like Landsat 7, band 6 is thermal band, only one band is there. In Landsat 8, band 10 and band 11, two bands are thermal band, but band 11 is not working properly, so only band 10 is working. So if you have only one band, there is always a problem. People wanted to come out of this problem. They decided, okay, instead of putting only one thermal band in the satellite, let us put two or more thermal band in the satellite and develop a new approach known as split window approach. So this split window approach is, a lot of assumptions are there inside, but still one of the highly used approach if your satellite has more than two bands of thermal infrared. So example of such bands are MODIS. MODIS has band 31 and band 32. AVHR sensor has two thermal bands and so on. Nowadays, almost all sensors has two or more than two thermal bands, because this method, split window approach, is pretty easy to apply. You need not have much more atmospheric information to do it. So again, I'm not going deeper into this. We will just go ahead. Okay, so we will talk about like Landsat, because Landsat data is freely available to us at a much higher resolution. So with Landsat data, you can calculate what is the radiance that reaches the satellite, or what is actually measured by the satellite. And as I told you, this particular website, if you use, it will give you these three parameters. You can substitute these parameters in the equation. This is atmospheric downwelling, atmospheric upwelling radiance, the transmissivity. All the three parameters, 1, 2, and 3, are given by that particular website. So this is, I'll just look at the down transmissivity. So this is component 3, this is component 2, this is component 1. Okay. So the three components in this equation are there. This is also. Yeah, this is also. Emissivity, somehow we have to calculate. There are different methods to calculate emissivity. So if you calculate emissivity, use the data from website, substitute whatever is measured by the satellite, plug in everything, we can calculate the surface temperature. Okay, so since that website is available to us, which provides us atmospheric information, calculation of LST using Landsat is a little bit easier for us. We can do it. But the only problem for us we need to estimate emissivity somehow. Without knowing the surface emissivity, we will always be in trouble. Okay. So these are some equations of how to do this with Landsat. Maybe if someone is really interested, we will explain it in detail towards the end of this lecture. And this is some methods developed by our research group on this sort of method is being tried by several years. We are trying to improve this method of estimating emissivity. So what essentially are we doing is, Landsat provides really good high resolution thermal data starting from 1980s. But the only problem is we don't have emissivity information. So we are developing or trying to improve certain methods for calculating the surface emissivity. So if you do this, we will be able to estimate land surface temperature from Landsat satellites. Okay, I'll give you a quick example. I was till now telling everything theoretically, how atmosphere will influence, how emissivity is required, and so on. We will see by like a direct example, a live physical example. Okay, So I take example of Landsat satellite, Landsat 7. The energy measured by the satellite is some 10 watt per meter square. 2 pixels are there, A and B. For over both the pixels A and B, it gives the same value. These 2 pixels have certain emissivity range, 0.9, 0.95, and the atmospheric terms are given here. Yeah, whatever is needed is given here. What we essentially have to do is calculate the surface temperature of 2 pixels A and B. That's all. For pixel A, if I do all the calculations, I get a temperature of 318 Kelvin. If similarly for pixel B, I'll get a temperature of 315 Kelvin. Okay, one is a 318, one is a 315. This is after correcting for atmospheric and emissivity effects. I have included both of them in my equation. I have corrected everything properly. Then I get this temperature. So this is like the actual LST we need for our own measurements or our own applications. But let us assume I don't have atmospheric information. That is not available to me. If that is the case, these corrections I will not be able to do. Like getting these values will not be possible. I will not be able to do the corrections. I will be calculating temperature like this. For the same 2 pixels A and B, instead of calculating 318 and 315 Kelvin, I'll be calculating 312 and 308. So I am underestimating the temperature. Similarly, let us assume the worst case scenario. I don't know the atmospheric effect. I don't know the temperature effect or the emissivity effect. If that is the case, the temperature I'll be calculating is only 304 Kelvin. Just see the difference. The actual temperature is 318 and 315. If I don't include these effects, I'll be having only 304 Kelvin, which is extremely low. So that is why I said, in order to have an accurate retrieval of LST, it is really important for us to have measurements about atmospheric effect and surface emissivity effect. If we neglect them, we will be actually under a fix. Whatever calculations we make, we will be struggling a lot, or our measurements will be wrong. Okay, so maybe this part also I'll skip because it may be a little too much at this time. I told you like all these things, somewhat the basics I have covered. One more thing we need to understand is, I told you what is known as a directional effect or directional anisotropy effects. I told you like our sensors will observe from only one direction. So a same object may look totally different if we look from different direction. Let us say sun is here, there is like a cropland, sensor is here. Okay, if the sensor is here, let us assume the sensor is seeing the most of this cropped part or the leafy part. So this sensor will calculate the temperature of T1. Let us say some other sensor looking like this. This sensor B, will see not only the leaves, but it will also see the leaves plus the gap in between the vegetation, this shadowed parts and everything. So the temperature it observes, T2, will be again different. So T1 will not be equal to T2. This is what I said, directional effect or directional anisotropy effect. With the difference in the angle in which our remote sensing sensor looks at the surface, our temperature measurements are going to vary. This is actually a case of a problem for us, but we have no other option. We have to live with it. Scientists are still trying hard to model what will be the effect of this variation, how to remove these effects. All these things people are trying to remove it, but still it's a big problem in doing thermal remote sensing. Not only thermal, it also exists in normal optical remote sensing also. In optical remote sensing, we neglect this or live with it. In thermal, it is like a slightly major issue. Anisotropy effect I talked about, like as the sensor is at different positions, it will see different parts of the land surface and the land may look completely different. Just a second, please. Okay, so we will move ahead from the theory part to seeing the applications. Like theory, I told you like basic concepts about emissivity, about atmospheric effect, what are we calculating and so on. So after calculating this temperature, what we will do, what are its applications? Before seeing that, I will briefly show you one particular example of an land surface temperature image. Like this is over like a small part of Kaveri river basin. Actually, like this is like the Kabini reservoir in Karnataka. This is like the Kabini river, and this is the main Kaveri river. Kabini meets Kaveri, and it flows like this. Okay, so and this is, I think, the Bhavani Sagar reservoir in Tamil Nadu. So this is like a mix of Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu parts, 3 states, and this is a part of Kaveri river basin. Here the temperature is given in this particular color bar. Brown color areas are having low temperature, and yellow color areas are having higher temperature. You can see along the river, okay, so where people do a lot of irrigated agriculture. People grow crops, sugarcane, rice, etc. They use the Kaveri river water to cultivate crops. And we know that water has a tendency to cool the surfaces. Water or vegetation has a tendency to cool, because of which land parcels containing healthy vegetation or water will have a lower temperature, and land parcels that are not having vegetation or that are having bare surfaces without water or without vegetation will have higher temperatures. Like these are all points with healthy vegetation or water. Similarly, this is like the hilly portion, the Western Ghats, which has like a lower temperature all around. But these parts are like barren surfaces with a higher temperature. So just by looking at the temperature, we will be able to understand a little bit about the land surface. And a lot of applications of thermal remote sensing comes because of this difference in surface temperature. And rather than just calculating the temperature at one time, if we calculate the diurnal temperature cycle, like diurnal cycle means temperature of the surface, how the temperature is varying within a day, with different time of day, how the temperature is varying. The diurnal cycle also will inform some important information about the land surface. That is, this is one agricultural area in Karnataka, one agricultural land. Over the land, we measure this temperature using some fixed sensor. It is not like using a contact thermometer. We use like a non-contact sensor, very similar to a remote sensing satellite, and we collected this measurement over an agricultural land. This blue curve tells us the surface temperature on a dry day, and this maroon or brown curve tells the surface temperature on a wet day during like monsoon period. You can see on a dry day, the temperature is little higher and shows a huge variation within a day. During like night and morning, it is cooler, and during daytime, it increases a lot, and again it comes down. Whereas during wet times, when crop is present and water is present, the temperature is not showing much variation. The temperature is more or less flat. The variation is much smaller and temperature is lower. So modeling this sort of diurnal cycle, like within a day how temperature varies, will also tell information about the availability of water in the surface, which we will be using for, again, many different applications. So the temperature not only varies in space, like at different points in space as given by this particular figure, it also varies with time, and that temporal variation also will tell us some important information about the land surface. So we will quickly see some examples of from which satellites we can get this temperature data. And there are like plenty of satellites available that has thermal infrared sensors with it. And the most common thing we use is MODIS sensor, roughly with a spatial resolution of 1000 meters. And Landsat has a resolution of 100 meters and so on. There are a lot of satellites. And with each satellite, we get image at different time period. Like with Landsat, you get one image every 16 days. With MODIS, we get one image every 1 to 2 days. For geostationary satellites, like over India, there is a satellite called INSAT 3D sent by ISRO, which tells us the surface temperature or the LST information. That will give image once every 30 minutes, but at a resolution of 5 kilometers. It's a very wide field sensors. So essentially what I want to say is temperature data actually provides a lot of information about the land surface. But unfortunately, we cannot get data with high spatial resolution. Like Landsat data, I told you it's available once only every 16 days. And even on that day, if there is a presence of cloud, we are gone. Satellite observation will not be there. So essentially, Landsat with its very high spatial resolution, say is actually required for several applications. But we will not get such high resolution data very frequently. Like MODIS and all gives data only 1000 meters, we get it frequently. So that is like a trade-off. We need thermal remote sensing data for various applications. We needed high spatial resolution, but we don't get it. Our resolution available is just 1000 meters. So how to go about it? Is there a way to improve this, or is there a way to get fine resolution data from this coarse resolution data? Yes, there are some ways which we are trying to do in our research group here in IIT Bombay, and also I was tried some of it when I was a PhD student before. So it is like we are trying to combine LST data from satellites with other information like other indices like NDVI, reflectances in red band and all, and trying to develop what are known as disaggregation models for improving the spatial resolution of satellites. Say MODIS is available at 1000 meters. We try to combine this with other data sets available from MODIS and trying to get this down to say 250 meter spatial resolution. This is disaggregation. We are also trying to combine data from different sensors. That is, say I told you INSAT 3D provide you data at 5 kilometer spatial resolution every 30 minutes. MODIS provides you data at 1 kilometer every 1 to 2 days. Landsat provides you information at 100 meter resolution every 16 days. Can we combine all these data to produce, say, something around like a 500 meter image every 30 minutes? This is known as data fusion, combining data from several sensors and producing a fine spatio-temporal resolution data for various applications. So this is like artificially generating data. We are synthesizing data. We are trying to do this also in order to get like a fine spatio-temporal resolution image, because I told you not only like a spatial image, but also the temporal variation of LST is needed for several applications. So we are trying to improve both the spatial and temporal aspects of remote sensing images available in thermal infrared datasets. So this is one such examples of how we are doing it. So this is like the true data from Landsat 7, and this is what we obtained from disaggregating MODIS using like different methods. So this sort of if you compare this with this, you can see like our disaggregated data is somewhat closer to the original data in representing the landform, and we are able to get some improvement in the in disaggregating the actual data set, so which we are using it for various applications. So we are now trying to develop a lot of methods for improving it. So this is the example for data fusion. So this is like INSAT 3D data, the geostationary satellite at 5 kilometers. This is MODIS data at 1 kilometer. We are trying to combine these at various time and trying to model the diurnal temperature cycle, that is the temporal variation of LST within a day. So this is like one such examples. We are doing it over different pixels, like one with cropland, one over urban areas, and so on. So we are having like the initial results are still promising, really good. So we are hopeful that down the line we will be able to produce like a high spatial temporal resolution LST data sets for various applications. Okay, so till now we have seen some theory about thermal remote sensing, what work we do, etc., etc. Now I will quickly tell you some important applications of thermal infrared remote sensing. Like the applications are plenty. I will suggest you to look at this particular paper by Sobrino and others. Sobrino is like a very big name in thermal infrared remote sensing. You can just look at this particular paper, which actually tells you a wide variety of applications for which thermal data is needed. So there is like a 2-page table in that particular paper, which is like extremely wide in telling you the applications. But due to time constraints, we will not look at all the applications. Some few applications I will briefly introduce to you. So some applications are crop water stress identification, estimating soil moisture and evapotranspiration, forest fire mapping, urban heat island effect, and so on. So as I said, the applications are very huge. So few case studies or few concepts I will quickly introduce to you on this particular point of time. First, we will talk about how the surface temperature is useful in calculating soil moisture and evapotranspiration. Okay, so soil moisture, we all know it is the amount of water present in the soil. Evapotranspiration is how much of that water in the soil or water in the land surface is converted as vapor and reaches the atmosphere. So it is like whatever water is present, after a few days it will evaporate and go back to the atmosphere, right? The same concept, we are trying to measure it. So we are invoking a principle of what is known as surface energy balance. And this surface energy balance will tell us if some energy is coming in from the sun, if something is present on the ground, and if water is present or not, how the energy will differentiate itself. That is, Earth has some amount of energy content, and it is also being provided energy continuously from sun. Sun provides energy to Earth's surface. If that is the case, how the energy will get transferred to different phases. That is, something will be used for heating up the land, something will be used for converting the water to vapor, and so on. So energy will be split into various ways, and by calculating this temperature, like this infrared going out, this LST, we will be able to calculate what is this ET value and how much is used by land surface for different processes. We will be able to do, not going into the deeper principles, but what we did using this principle is we are now able to quantify or able to estimate the amount of water vapor that is going out of Earth's surface. This because like when you want to plan for water resource applications, or when you want to plan for irrigation, how much to irrigate a particular crop, it is essential to know how much water is being evaporated. Then only we will be able to do all these things. So now we are able to produce spatial maps of how much ET is being generated from the ground surface using this temperature data. We are using the principle of surface energy balance to do it, and we are now producing like a India country level product once every 8 days at 5 kilometer spatial resolution. So we are collaborating with ISRO scientists and trying to do for entire India. So once the product is available, I'll be putting it in the public domain. And one of the other major example is like urban heat island effect. So what exactly urban heat island effect is? Say if there is like a huge city. Okay, so a city will be full of people, factories, car, etc., etc. And all city, we know that it will be devoid of vegetation. Mostly we will have concrete structures, roads, and everything. But the surrounding rural areas we will take where it is, this is like rural area, okay, surrounding the city. So the rural area actually may have a lot of agricultural land, a lot more soil and everything. On any given day, if you look at the temperature profile, like if you measure temperature at different points along this line, over city, the temperature will be higher, and over rural areas, the temperature will be lower. This phenomenon of increased surface temperature over cities are what we call urban heat island effect. So this urban heat island effect is actually like a major cause of concern for urban planners. It increases the need for air conditioning. It provides a lot of health issues like overheat will cause over stress on the body. It will drain energy from our body. It's like a health issue, all those things. So it is like a major field of study for measuring this urban heat island effect and providing mitigation measures. Mitigation measures means how to reduce this urban heat island effect. So one such example I'm giving here, this is over the Los Angeles city in US, where these pockets, the major part of the city, how the temperature looks at different time. This is at during like evening, this is at like night 9 o'clock, this is at like night 11:30, early morning 4 o'clock, and so on. At different times, how the temperature look. You can still see whether being day or night, the temperature of these urban pockets are always higher actually. These are all big urban pockets in Los Angeles city. This surrounding sides are actually beaches with its lower temperature and so on. So beaches have typically lower temperature, urban pockets have high temperature and so on. So mapping this temperature and trying to reduce this effect is actually useful for various applications, especially for mitigating this or reducing this urban heat island effect. And one more example is like agricultural applications. I told you like crop water stress identification. That is like when crops are healthy, when people supply good amount of water to the crops, its temperature will go down because of this surface cooling effect of water and evapotranspiration. On the other hand, if the crop suffers water stress, if there is not enough water is available to the crops, its temperature will go up, which will be directly visible in thermal remote sensing images. Like you can use optical data for this, but there will be a time lag. Let us say like today the plants are not being watered. Plants will immediately undergo water stress. Its growth will be decreased instantly because of this, but the signal of this stress will not be visible in optical images. But in thermal infrared image, the temperature will immediately rise, which can be clearly seen in temperature data. Just by looking at the temperature data, we can provide irrigation to it, improve the crop health and improve the yield quality. So this is like one example of a case study which shows like how thermal remote sensing is related to yield of the crop. For corn crop they are doing it. So this is like pockets of land where the temperature of the crop was consistently higher actually, and these portions the temperature of the crop was consistently lower. You can compare this with the final yield they obtained after the crop season. The yield they obtained is essentially wherever the crop underwent stress, then its temperature will rise. The amount of yield was pretty less, whereas the portions which appeared cooler for most of the season, the amount of yield they got was much higher. This is like one simple example. A lot more exercises has to be done to prove this in a more concrete way, but this shows that one very good example of the use of thermal remote sensing. Actually, in our research group in IIT Bombay, we are trying to set up like a field station where we are trying to use thermal remote sensing data and ground observations in order to calculate the crop water stress and yield prediction of crops and so on. So essentially the applications of thermal remote sensing is widefold. I'm not for the want of time, I'm not going deeper into all these things. I've just provided you like an extremely broad overview. But just to quickly summarize, the applications are manifold. The concept wise, even though I told you a lot of limitations of thermal remote sensing, how complex it is, once we come out of all these complexities, the application or the potential use of thermal remote sensing is very wide. We can use it for many different applications. Like even if you look at like my own research group here in IIT Bombay, students are working in different areas. One student is working in urban heat island effect. One student is working in agricultural water stress monitoring and yield prediction. One student is working in like evapotranspiration mapping. So the applications are plenty, and thermal remote sensing data is not being like utilized to its fullest extent. That's what I will say, at least in the Indian context. So my aim is like get more people interested toward this particular area, and just to wide open or open this particular field to many researchers in this field, so that others can also like potentially use data from thermal remote sensing and improve or develop their own applications for the research or project purposes. Maybe with this, I will end my lecture. The remaining 15 minutes of time, maybe we can have discussions based on the questions the audience may have. So thank you very much for listening, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Audience, if you have inquiries, you may raise now.
It seems there are not many queries. Yeah, maybe the topic may be new to many of you. I understand it's like a little tricky topic, I will say, but yes, it still has like a lot of potential for you to understand. Yeah.
Sir, there is a question from Shivateja Mehti. He's
Yes,
asking that whether INSAT data is free or cost.
INSAT data is freely available. Yes. You have to go to a site called MOSDAQ. I'll write here. It is like a site developed by Space Application Center of ISRO, which basically gives you this INSAT 3D data. So this is freely downloadable. They provide image at every half an hour temporal resolution across India. It is there. It's free. And apart from this, all of the many satellites such as MODIS, Landsat, there is another sensor called VIRS, Sentinel-3. There are plenty of satellites which provides free thermal remote sensing data, which we can use.
Any other queries? Sir, another question from Indrajit. He is asking that can you please give some useful link from where we can get
I'm sorry?
thermal remote sensing module?
No, I'm not getting the questions clearly.
So he is asking that can you please give some useful link from where we can get thermal remote sensing module?
Module means for learning materials or the data. Is it? I think it's related to learning materials, right? Hopefully, yes. So maybe like maybe both I'll try to answer. Learning modules, basically speaking, not much of learning modules available for thermal remote sensing in the public domain. Everything is like textbook based or journal article based. But in order to get like a deeper understanding, what I would suggest is like maybe I'm now actually creating a course, the NPTEL course. I think most of you would know about the NPTEL. which is like MHRD is highly developing. It's an open source portal where many different courses are available, which anyone can learn for free. So I'm developing a course on basics of remote sensing, in which I will cover a good portion of thermal infrared remote sensing. So at least like few lectures will be there where I will explain everything in detail. Here I have just given a broad overview for the want of time. There I will try to explain most of the things in detail. So that particular course will be available from next January. The course recording is now going on. From next January, I'll make it will be available in the NPTEL portal. That is one thing. Or nowadays, you all know that all our lectures that we are doing in IIT Bombay is online mode, and everything is recorded. Maybe once after the semester ends, where again I will talk in detail about this remote sensing processes, I will make such lectures also freely available in YouTube, where you can read. Maybe those lectures I will post it in my own website where the links are available so people can see. But unfortunately, at this stage, not much of good thermal remote sensing portals are available. There are like good materials available for normal remote sensing, but for understanding thermal remote sensing, the resources are pretty limited, I will say. Everything is limited to textbooks or journal papers. Classroom video based courses are not there yet, at least to my knowledge. But next semester, I hope my course will be available to free, and it will be more detailed, where all the physical concepts I will explain in detail in a more slower pace, which I hope people will be able to much better understand and appreciate. So this is regarding the educational thing, like the video class materials. At least please wait till next semester. For data sets, thermal remote sensing data sets, I would suggest few data portals, like MOSDAQ is one of the portal which I said this will provide you INSAT 3D data. And for Landsat data, which is available from 1985, I think, is available in what is that website? There is a portal called NASA Earth, which includes, or NASA Earth Data Portal, I'll say NASA Earth Data Portal. I don't remember the exact website, but you can Google this NASA Earth Data Portal. They have data from Landsat, they have data from MODIS, they have data from another sensor called VIRS, etc. And also, if you look for Copernicus data portal, look for Sentinel-3 data. This is another geostationary, sorry, polar orbiting satellite similar to MODIS. This data, Sentinel-3, is again available. You can search for Copernicus data portal Sentinel-3. If you do it in Google, you will get this. So this provides data from Sentinel-3 satellites. So basically, these are the freely available thermal remote sensing satellites in the globe. So I think I answered both the components, data availability and educational resource availability, materials availability. Yeah. So any other questions there, ma'am? Okay, lot of questions are there in can see there is a session. Can we do agricultural crop identification with thermal remote sensing data? Crop identification may not be possible. Thermal data will not tell you about the characteristics of crop basically. So you can, but you can use it for crop water stress monitoring, but not for crop identification, I'll say. And yes, and which software used for fusion of remote sensing data? Normally in our research group, we don't use any particular software for the processing. We try to develop our own codes for getting the needs. So myself and most of my students will use Python based codes for doing whatever our research work is. But almost all software like ND or ERDA should be fine for opening a thermal infrared image and processing it. But due to the large amount of data we process, we prefer using a programming code rather than using a particular software. I think, yes, that ends almost all the questions. Most of the questions are related to learning material. But the problem is, yeah, as I told, learning material, most likely by next semester when my course is open in public domain, I hope it helps a lot. Or you feel free to write me, maybe my lecture materials I will share once the semester ends, because the semester is still going on. So once the semester ends, I'll try to share my lecture materials. Yeah. And is there any specific domain from where we can get micro level thermal data of any specific megacity or city worldwide? So one question is from Indrajit Roy Chaudhary. It's about micro level thermal data of any specific megacity or city worldwide. So I think it is like a fine spatial resolution data you're inferring about. And yeah, globally data is available, like Landsat, MODIS, everything provides you global coverage. You can combine data from MODIS over like a period of 1 to 2 days and get a global image. It is there. And yeah, many data are available across the globe. Like if you use this Landsat, you will get a finer spatial resolution. About 100 meters, you will get information over any city you want, almost any major city you want. It is there. Please take time and search the NASA Earth Data Portal, or there is one more portal called I forgot the name. I think it's USGS Earth Explorer, I guess. So there also you can search for the data and get it. But yeah, Landsat data is free, MODIS data is free, which provides you a global coverage over any city you want. So I guess, yes, that ends the question answers put here. So yes, I think I can end the talk. Yes.
So, shall we wind up the session?
I think I am done from my side. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Be thankful for what you have. You will end up having more. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Eswar Rajashekaran sir, for sparing his valuable time for making this session a very meaningful one. Thank you so much, sir, for devoting your precious time and endowing the young people with your words of wisdom and experience. Finally, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the participants for your active participation. Thank you one and all for your cordial cooperation. Have a nice day. Thank you. Participants, the feedback link is posted in the chat box. Please submit your feedback. Thank you one and all.
Yeah, thank the organizers for inviting me, and all the best to all the participants. And yes, I will be happy to share your questions. You can just search my name in my website. It's there in IIT Bombay portal. If you search Eswar Rajashekaran, my website will come up. So you can write to me for anything you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.